To say that Cyberpunk 2077 hasn't lived up to expectations, well, that would be an understatement. This is a game that people were looking forward to since CD Projekt Red announced it way back in 2013. Well, that's when the first trailer came out, but at their summer conference back in 2012, there was mention that the developers were also working on another game. They didn't mention much else about said game, but it seems quite evident that that game was in fact Cyberpunk 2077. And with that in mind, odds are they'd been working on the game, which means it's quite possible they started to develop it back in 2011, meaning they've been working on this game for nearly a decade. 10 years, guys. And it's still having countless issues, which include the game being glitchy or breaking new consoles altogether. Or so they say. Either way, today on Life's Biggest Questions, we're asking, is Cyberpunk 2077 the worst game ever made? Before we get into it, guys, make sure you hit that like button or else you won't get your hands on a PS5 or a Series X. And if you already have one and you don't hit that like button, well, I'll just come steal yours from you. Alright, let's get into it. When the game was first announced, people were going absolutely crazy. Given that The Witcher 3 is considered one of the best games of all time, few were thinking that CD Projekt Red's next game would be considered one of the worst. Well, maybe that's a bit of a stretch. I don't know if I would say that Cyberpunk 2077 is the absolute worst game ever made, but given the amount of poor reviews and issues gamers on both 4th and 5th generation consoles are having, well, it seems the verdict is in. This game is definitely not what people had hoped for. Initially, it seems the game had positive reviews. Maybe that's just people being excited, or maybe for a short period of time, there were no issues at all. Yet as of this recording, just last night, Sony took Cyberpunk 2077 off of their store, and the gamer's developers are offering full refunds to those who purchased the game digitally. Yikes. So what went wrong here? Well, it seems like a lot. Aside from the numerous glitches in the game, it seems those playing on the PS4 and Xbox One aren't having much of a gaming experience at all. With non-playable characters' faces being blurry, the textures in the game taking very long to load, or the game freezing altogether requiring a console reset, I don't see why anyone would spend a dime on this game. Of course, prior to the release, the hype was very real, but now it seems everyone is singing a much different tune. Even the developer's stock dropped 20%, so if that isn't an indication of what's going on, I mean, come on. Even the suits wanted in on the action and were disappointed. Taking a Twitter, Ask PlayStation tweeted out, I quote, "SIE strives to ensure a high level of customer satisfaction, and we will begin to offer a full refund for all gamers who have purchased Cyberpunk 2077 via PlayStation Store and won a refund. Please visit the following link to initiate the refund." However, adding insult to injury, it seems that the link attached to that tweet to ask for a refund wasn't working either, which is why they followed up their tweet with, I quote, "We're aware some users are experiencing issues accessing the form available within the provided link. We're working to get it up and running as soon as possible. Thank you for your patience." There's just something about PlayStation saying, hey, sorry the game isn't working, click this link for a refund even though it's not our fault, and having that link not work either, it's just so ironic. Oh, and I love it all, especially because I'm an Xbox guy. Now with that being said, it seems just because Cyberpunk 2077 is having a ton of issues on all consoles, it may not be the worst game ever made. I mean, it seems like it's way too early to make the determination, even though it seems the reviews are in and people are pissed. But how can you genuinely review a game that isn't even working properly? Of course, that could be the reason why it's labeled the worst game ever made, but it seems going back throughout the years, there are tons of other games that give Cyberpunk a run for its money. At least one fighting to be the worst game ever made. It seems there are a few games that top most lists when trying to find the worst ones ever made. They include Hong Kong 97, Custer's Revenge, E.T., as in a game based on the movie, and PacMan. I know PacMan really shouldn't be on there, as I personally love it, but it seems not everyone is on board with the yellow circle eating ghosts. Well, turns out we're not talking about the original arcade PacMan, but the one put out by Atari in 1982. And even though it's the best-selling Atari 2600 game of all time, moving more than 7 million copies, as well as being the best-selling video game of all time at its release, it seems the critics felt differently. More specifically, it seems when compared to the arcade version, critics just felt it couldn't compete. And given the hype that the game was built around, this seemed to be a huge letdown. In May of 1982, Electronic Games magazine wrote their first negative review for an Atari game, writing, "Considering the anticipation and considerable time the Atari designers had to work on it, it's astonishing to see a home version of a classic arcade contest so devoid of what gave the original its charm." Yikes. And it seems other magazines and critics felt the same way, with the majority claiming how it differs from the original arcade game, the graphics and audio visuals altogether weren't that great, and in general, it was a big miss. Yet it seems people didn't seem to think so, and still is regarded as one of the worst games ever made, despite all of its success. However, another game that wasn't so well received, for pretty obvious reasons, was Custer's Revenge. Also released for the Atari 2600, this game was made for adults, as the main goal was to dodge arrows being shot at you while making your way over to someone who you eventually force yourself upon. if you get what I'm saying. The game itself had "not for sale to minors" written on it, and well, for good reason. You'd play as a character named Cluster who wears a hat, boots, and has a visible heart on. Let's just say I wish I never knew this game's existence, and I really wouldn't recommend you guys looked into it. It's really So when comparing Cyberpunk 2077 to those two games, even though PacMan was just hated on by critics, I think it's safe to say it definitely isn't the worst game ever made. And if you're still unsure about that, even after I just told you about the Custer's game, well, you really gotta do some soul searching, my friends. And it seems there are numerous other games which are absolutely awful as well. Although I won't be able to talk about each one in this video, we definitely need to speak about Hong Kong 97 and E.T. Hong Kong 97 was released in 1995 and is next to impossible to find an actual copy of it. According to the developers, the game was made in just 2 days. And let me tell you, it really shows. It's grown a cult following for being notoriously bad, and considering how you start over if you get hit just once, well, it was probably very frustrating to play as well. Aside from the random photos included in the background, such as the logo for Asia Television and the Chinese Coca-Cola sign to name a few, the game has been regarded to be the absolute worst of all time, and for good reason. It looks like a school project. And speaking of school projects, we also need to mention E.T. This game was also for the Atari 2600, and like a handful of the others on here, it's considered one of the worst games of all time. It was designed in less than 6 weeks, and this game was so poorly developed, people didn't even know how to play it. Okay, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but I mean, really, this game was awful. And this was a great lesson for those in the industry to realize sometimes patience is a virtue. Given that the film E.T. was released in May of 1982 at the Cannes Film Festival and would make its US debut in June, they rushed the game to get in on the hype. And given the insane success E.T. had, becoming one of the biggest blockbusters of all time, winning numerous Academy Awards, and being the highest grossing film surpassing Star Wars at the time, it's clear why the game was rushed. The hype was very real. And even though the film won the awards they won in 1983, months after the game's release, it seems everyone knew the film was going to steal the show after it was released. It really was that good. So to no surprise, when the game was released, people were very excited, only to be let down. And by let down, I mean they were very, very upset, as this game has also been argued to be one of the worst games ever made. So now let's bring it back to Cyberpunk 2077. Sure, Keanu Reeves is breathtaking, but unfortunately it seems the game itself just couldn't live up to expectations. However, there is a silver lining. Unlike the other games, which have now been out for almost 40 years, this game is still very new. They still have a ton of time to turn things around by patching things up and working on all the issues that have been highlighted over the past week since the game's release. And on December 13th, the official Cyberpunk 2077 Twitter page tweeted out a statement explaining they're going to be doing everything in their power to ensure the game will exceed expectations, and they will be rolling out regular updates and patches to make sure the game is as great as it was originally expected to be. So before we officially give Cyberpunk 2077 the title of being the worst game ever made, I think we need to give the developers and studios more of a chance. I mean, I know they've had about 10 years to work on it, but as they say, great things take time. Some movies take more than 10 years to make and are still garbage. I say we give CD Projekt Red another chance, as they've proved to us in the past they can make a solid game, as they've done time and time again. And when comparing Cyberpunk's bugs or glitches to some of these other games as a whole, it's really night and day. That being said, comparing an Atari game to a PS4 or PS5 game is also night and day. So with that in mind, maybe Cyberpunk 2077 will end up being one of the worst games developed from an initial release point of view. I will say if you guys come back to this video in a month or two, the majority of the comments are going to be from people saying that it's actually a really good game. For some reason, people tend to comment on older videos without realizing when they were posted. But hey, that's alright. To each their own, I guess. Now, as always, guys, let me know your thoughts on this one below, and if you've played the game yet, do you think it'll be considered one of the worst games ever made, or maybe one of the worst game launches of all time? Either way, I genuinely believe this one could bounce back. It's just a matter of time. For now, let's reply to some comments from the video. What if the Mandalorian was real? TidyJGamer117 said, "This is the way. This is the way." Kami Tenshi said, "Fun fact, Boba Fett's real name is Boba Yoda." I don't think so. Is it? I don't know. I probably should have Googled that one. Boba Yoda, really? I don't know. I feel like that's more of like a Baby Yoda play on the whole Mandalorian thing. I don't know though. Reese Carter said, "Then we'd all try to steal Baby Yoda." I definitely wouldn't. Have you seen what that thing does? And then Mando also kills it. Like anybody that tries to kill it, why? Why would you steal it? Mando would just come kill you. Anyways, guys, that's all for this one. I've been your host, Jared Bronstein, and we'll see you soon. More specifically, it seems when compared to the arcade version, critics just felt it couldn't compete. And given the hype that the game was built around, this seemed to be a huge letdown. Speaking of being let down, I'm gonna let down I don't know. I was gonna make a joke that I'm going down to get the coffee though.